more concerning news about the AstraZeneca vaccine tonight. Provinces have been advised to stop using it for people younger than 55 until more reports of blood clots in Europe are looked into. This is the third time in a month guidance on this vaccine has changed. We'll get more information from the head of the Immunization Advisory Panel, which is making the recommendation. And the third wave of this pandemic has arrived in the most populous regions of the country. Highly contagious variants could make it far worse than what we've seen before. Should we start rethinking where we distribute vaccines and who we give them to? Dr. Michael Warner will be here to explain why he thinks the answer is yes. And China retaliates against Canada, slapping sanctions on some politicians. We'll talk to MPs who are being sanctioned about what it means for them and what should be done about it. Let's start, though, with Canada hitting pause on its rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine for people under the age of 55. This marks the third time, as I mentioned, in a month that the Immunization Advisory Panel has changed its guidance on the vaccine. This time it's because of reports of rare blood clots in young Europeans. Dr. Carolyn Quach-Thahn is the chair of the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. Hi, Dr. Quach-Thahn. Thanks again for making the time for this. Appreciate it very much.
You're very welcome.
What are you basing this latest recommendation on?
So this recommendation is basically a precautionary measure awaiting Health Canada to do its investigation. So what happened is that, over the past few weeks, we've seen a number of cases of serious clots happening in Europe. And over the weekend, we were presented with data explaining to us the mechanistic what was happening behind that and why and how it could be associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So basically, when you get this vaccine, we don't know exactly why, but some people will develop autoantibodies that will trigger the platelets to then just clot together. And so when these platelets clot together, that's when you have your clot somewhere. And we've seen mainly clots in the brain or in your abdominal circulation or the pulmonary circulation. And so because of that, what we then tried to look at was the rate of these clotting complications following AstraZeneca versus the risk of COVID-19 if we were to pause the program. And so looking at this based on age, we realized that most of those complications were happening in people less than 50 years of age, in whom really, even if you were to wait 2 to 3 weeks more to get an alternate vaccine, the risk of actual complications and death would be manageable. So what we said is, let's pause this for the people under the age of 55. Let Health Canada do their work, answer the questions that they have with the company and with the European Medicine Agency. And after that, we'll see if we can resume the program or not. But we thought that we needed to be more careful rather than not, given the fact that the fatality rate of those complications is currently 40%, which is pretty high, and that the incidence of that complication is somewhere between 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million. And in some countries, it was even lower to 1 in 24,000. So something that can occur, rarely, but sometimes in some countries for some reasons that we don't necessarily understand, not that rarely.
Yeah, that's a big range. And I wanted to ask you about the incidence because in previous interviews I've done with experts, when this issue first surfaced, this concern first surfaced, they said, based on the data that was available, it looked like the incidence of these clots was lower, even in the number of people who had been vaccinated, than the general population. Are you now seeing evidence to the contrary?
Well, it's with the new numbers that we have from Europe, we seem to have more cases than expected. And so, as evidence accumulates, I think we have to act on them. It's possible that now the complication is known, and so people are alerted to it, will report more of those complications, and so we might see more the incidence rise again. But I think we have to have a good understanding of that rate. It's still fluctuating because, as anything that's new, the more you talk about it, the more people report it, and so it increases. But with that, we would hope that the fatality rate would decrease.
And when you mentioned, Dr. Quach-Thahn, this being a pause, do you have any indication from Health Canada, for example, how long this investigation may take, how long this pause might be in place for?
That's very hard for me to say, but the questions that Health Canada is asking the company and trying to, having maybe to look in some charts, it will take probably at least 2 to 3 weeks, but we could be surprised. I don't know exactly how quickly those investigations happen, but we don't expect anything to change before next week, and then in the next week we'll see where they're at. I think the best people to ask that question to would be Health Canada.
Okay, and your message also to people, because there are Canadians who are under 55. Some provinces decided to target, for example, specific frontline workers or younger people because they did see the rate of the spread of the virus increasing among young people in their province. So people have received at least one dose of AstraZeneca. What is your message to them right now?
So if it's been more than 20 days that you've received your vaccine and you're fine, then forget about it. All the cases that have happened were between day 4 and 16. So after that, let it go. If you've just received your dose, what is recommended is that if you develop symptoms of shortness of breath, chest pain, headache that does not go away, that is not your regular headache, dizziness that is not going away after a good night's sleep, abdominal pain that is excruciating, then go and see your physician, go to the ER so that they evaluate what is happening. In parallel, physicians are getting an algorithm to be able to detect those cases and manage them appropriately, because it's not, you don't treat those clots the same way you treat other types of clots. And so all that together, we think, will decrease the likelihood of fatality. The other question that is going to be answered is, what do we do with people who got a first dose of AstraZeneca with their second dose?
That's what I want to
ask. Great question. There's currently a clinical trial that is happening in the UK where they're mixing and matching AstraZeneca with Pfizer. And so we are hoping to get those data within the next few months to be able to say to people who got the AstraZeneca first, if ever we continue with this pause, to then get the Pfizer vaccine. But so that study is in the works, and we are hoping to get data in the next few months.
And so what about even people who are over the age of 55? Because many of them also received the AstraZeneca shot. There's 1.5 million new doses coming this week from the United States. Should they also be watching out, even though they're not in the age group in which this is being paused? Should they also be watching out for those symptoms in the first 20 days? Should they be worried about the possibility of a second dose? What do you say to them?
Well, I have to say that the symptoms I've described, even if they happen to you without any vaccine, you should be going to the emergency department, because a headache that is horrific, difficulty breathing, chest pain, that's not something you are going to take lightly, whatever happens. For those people 55 years of age and older, the complication in that age group seems very rare. Nothing has been detected really in Europe. There were, a few cases age 60, but most of them are younger women. And so it's just a matter of then balancing the risk versus benefit of taking that vaccine. So those who have been vaccinated, same thing. I mean, I wouldn't do anything different, and I would think that the risk is much lower in that population. As for the second dose, we'll have to see again what happens. But at this point in time, the effectiveness of the AstraZeneca, in particular in the older age group, has been seen in the UK in particular, where at least with one dose, we've been seeing 80% protection against hospitalization and death, in particular in the older population, 70 and 80 years, even with those with frailty. So to me, that advantage is not something to take lightly. rightly, if you're able to be protected against severe outcomes, then the vaccine is worth it. And on top of it, because those VIPIT complications haven't been seen in that age group, to me it is reassuring.
And I know that your group is following the data, and so I ask this with a great amount of respect, but there, I think it's not just anti-vaxxers right now. It's a lot of average Canadians who are getting an inundation of various recommendations. First, not for older people because there wasn't enough data, and I know there's reasons behind it, but then this pause and might be feeling like I'm just going to hedge my bets and wait until I can get a different vaccine. Would you yourself take AstraZeneca, and what would you say to those individuals in this country right now?
Yeah, and I fully understand. I mean, seriously, when you look back on the history of this AstraZeneca vaccine, we all say, I don't know what happened, but it was born under a not a good star. The data that were presented at first weren't clear enough, so we decided not to give it for the 65 and over, and then data from the real world evidence came showing that it was okay. I mean, I think, and when I look at that, were we too transparent with the Canadian public, saying every time we had a doubt, we just said we have a doubt and we do not want to put you at risk. And that's what is happening every time we have a doubt. And because we have other vaccines here, we say, well, we have a doubt, therefore we are going to edge our bets, as you're saying, on the mRNA vaccine. However, if you are going to delay your vaccination by 2, 3, 4 weeks because you're not able to get that mRNA vaccine, to me, the risk of catching COVID when you're older and the risk of catching COVID and having complications from it are much higher than taking the vaccine now, given the risk-benefit analysis that we're doing. But I understand that, seriously, with this AstraZeneca vaccine, every time something new happens, we're all pulling our hair. I mean, we would like for this vaccine to just, sail through like the others, but for some reason, there are little glitches here and there, and we are fully transparent with you to say, there's a glitch, we're looking at the glitch, but in the meantime, we're not making a recommendation for that vaccine. And from the beginning, I mean, NACI has said that, for at least those that needed it most, we were making a preferential recommendation for the mRNA vaccines, and people asked us why. And we are being fully transparent. Maybe it's too transparent. I don't know. I mean, it's my first pandemic of this size, and I sure hope it's my last.
I think we're all in the same boat there. Just one quick question before I let you go. I know last time you were NACI was also looking at the delay in doses and whether or not those who are immunocompromised or the elderly might see a pivot in the recommendation there to shorten the 4-month delay just for those specific groups. Is that recommendation coming soon, do you think?
Well, we were working on it until VIPIT came along, and so we had to just change our gears a little bit and deal with this clotting adverse event. And so we'll get back to it, and so hopefully we'll be able to make something public soon. But so the discussions are still ongoing. I can't tell you exactly where it's going to finish yet.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Dr. Quach-Thahn, thanks as always for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Peter Hotez, he's the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. He's also the co-director of the Center for Vaccine Development at Texas Children's Hospital. He's with us from Houston. Hi, Doctor. Good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
I have a number of questions around AstraZeneca, but if you could just weigh in for a moment on what my colleague was reporting on, the possibility of a so-called 4th wave in the United States. How concerned are you?
Yeah, I'm quite concerned. I've been concerned for weeks because we have the B.1.1.7 variant that first rose out of the United Kingdom, and we know that's much more transmissible. Also, studies from Denmark and the UK showing higher lethality, higher rates of hospitalization here in Texas. More than half the virus isolates are now with the B.1.1.7 variant, and now we're starting to see the numbers go back up in certain parts of the country, and unfortunately, a lot of those near the Canadian border. So that gives me pause for concern for Canada. So they're going up in Michigan, they're going up in New York and New Jersey, Massachusetts, and also in the upper Midwest. Anecdotal reports, I haven't seen the numbers confirmed, of a lot of younger people being hospitalized as well. And all of that may reflect the B.1.1.7 variant. So yeah, I think a fourth wave is really possible. And it's all about a race between how quickly we can vaccinate the American people versus the B.1.1.7 variant and its ascendancy.
And I think when we look south of the border, we see such a quick rollout, relatively speaking, of the vaccines, but it looks like maybe not quick enough, even for the variants. From your perspective, how much more vaccination has to happen in order to make a dent in the spread of those variants?
Well, I think the Biden administration is doing a good job maximizing our ability to vaccinate. But, we're a big country and we've only got about 28% of the U.S. population that's gotten even a single dose of the vaccine. So we have another good 6-7 weeks before we really start to get our arms around this epidemic here in the U.S. So we've got a ways to go, and some states are underperforming as well. So even though I think we are starting to roll out large numbers of doses, it's still not happening fast enough, and it's going to be a race to see what wins out: the B.1.1.7 variant and that fourth peak, or vaccinations.
I want to also get your perspective on what we're dealing with, what we're talking about here in Canada today, and that is the recommendation is being made now to provinces to pause use of AstraZeneca in people under the age of 55 because of the incidence of blood clotting in European countries. Based on what you've read and what you've seen about the incidence of those blood clots, how worried would you be about AstraZeneca? What are your thoughts on the use of that vaccine?
Well, the messaging has been very confusing, and the Europeans are not all speaking with one voice. So you had a couple of weeks ago, France, Germany, some important Western European countries suspend its use, and with the German government sending out a memo through their public Paul Ehrlich Institute that there seemed to be association with a rare clotting condition called sinus venous thrombosis. But then the European Medicine Agency, their regulatory authority, came along and said, no worries, we're going to move forward. And now we have this concern issued by the Canadian government. So there's been a plausible mechanism that's been put forward by a group of German hematologists, and it does make sense. The one thing that doesn't make sense is if it's due to antibodies to the spike protein binding to platelets or other white blood cells, why only the AstraZeneca vaccine? Why not all of the vaccines? So there's still a lot of confusion, and hopefully this is the Canadian Regulatory Authority buying time and to better understand this, because as I often say, the vaccine ecosystem is very fragile. It doesn't take much for a vaccine to be voted off the island, even if it's a good vaccine. And I'm worried not only for Canada that it won't get used at a time when the B.1.1.7 variant is coming up, but remember, this is one of the workhorse vaccines we're depending on for Latin America, for Africa, and this could really derail one of the few workhorse vaccines we have for global health.
It's also a vaccine that your country, that the United States, is loaning us. We're supposed to get 1.5 million doses of it this week because the U.S. has yet to approve it. Do you know anything about that process? Why, for example, it hasn't yet?
Well, I think we'll see the application for emergency use authorization, and presumably our FDA, which is our regulatory agency, is reviewing that data. I think ultimately it will be released. I think it's important that the U.S. Does that, not only for the United States, but for the world. If the FDA, if for some reason the FDA declines to do this, it will send a chilling message across the world about that vaccine. And so I think it's really important. Is
there an anticipated timeline for what you mentioned there? Like, is it anytime soon that we might expect even an authorization?
I don't know. I've not heard any updates recently.
Okay, Doctor, I'll leave it there. I appreciate you making the time for us this evening and sharing your expertise. Thank you so much.
Sure, anytime.
Dr. Peter Hotez, he's the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.